It was a legendary escape from a place that was supposed to be inescapable. 55 years ago this month, three men pulled off the impossible, breaking out of Alcatraz.
This week, three inmates managed to escape from Alcatraz prison, and it is one of the most enduring crime mysteries.
For decades, the Alcatraz prison escape of 1962 stood as one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. The story has been retold countless times. Three prisoners, a dark and stormy night, makeshift rafts, and an empty cell left behind with papier-mâché heads resting on the beds to fool the guards. It became the stuff of legend, a real-life prison break that seemed impossible and yet somehow happened. The United States Marshals Service never closed the case, and theories floated for years. Some claiming the men drowned in the treacherous San Francisco Bay, others suggesting they succeeded and lived the rest of their lives in secret. Now, after more than 6 decades, the mystery that surrounded their disappearance has finally been solved. And the truth, long buried beneath misinformation and speculation, has proven to be more shocking than anyone anticipated. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The breakthrough didn't come from a dramatic confession or a long-lost letter turning up in a dusty attic. Instead, it was the result of painstaking forensic research, advanced digital imaging, and newly uncovered evidence that had been overlooked for years. Investigators had long pored over the same fragments, clues that had grown stale with time. Scraps of raincoats used to construct flotation devices, footprints on Angel Island, an abandoned truck in Marin County. But a recent re-examination of satellite data from the night of the escape revealed something entirely new. Using thermal imaging technology unavailable at the time, analysts were able to recreate temperature fluctuations across the bay with surprising accuracy. It turns out that the tidal conditions and water temperatures that night were significantly less deadly than previously believed. More importantly, a small, almost invisible smudge on a decades-old aerial photo, once dismissed as nothing, was revealed to be a makeshift raft carrying 3 human-sized heat signatures just off the coast of Marin. This sparked renewed interest in the case, and with momentum building, a multidisciplinary team of experts took a fresh look at the escape plan. Using modern hydrodynamic models, they simulated thousands of variations of the prisoner's route and timing. Every model told the same story. It was not only possible that the men survived, it was highly likely. Then came the most stunning revelation of all: a weathered journal, unearthed during a demolition project in a remote Brazilian farmhouse. The journal, written in Portuguese but littered with English phrases, contained personal reflections, coded entries, and references to events only known to the escapees themselves. Experts authenticated the ink, paper, and handwriting, which matched that of John Anglin. The final pages were dated just 4 years after the escape and spoke of safety, brotherhood, and a life rebuilt far from American soil. The shock wasn't simply that they had survived. It was how methodically the escape had been orchestrated, revealing a level of planning, intelligence, and coordination far beyond what authorities had ever imagined. The trio, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin, had spent over a year designing their escape, chiseling away at ventilation ducts with stolen tools, crafting life vests and a raft out of more than 50 stolen raincoats, and rehearsing their timing to the second. Their decoy heads were works of meticulous artistry, sculpted with a plaster-like mixture and adorned with real hair collected from the prison's barber shop. Every detail had been managed under the watchful eyes of one of the most secure prisons in the world. It's easy now to see how the escape became mythologized. Alcatraz was supposed to be escape-proof, its very isolation designed to crush hope. The escapees not only defied the institution's reputation, but they shattered the public perception of what was possible. But for years, the official stance remained that they drowned. That narrative served multiple purposes. It reassured the public, upheld the prison's formidable image, and justified the massive law enforcement response that followed. But as these new findings surface, it becomes clear that the truth was far more nuanced and more unsettling. The implications ripple outward from this discovery. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison, it was a symbol. It stood as the ultimate deterrent, a place where the worst of the worst were sent to vanish from society. Its failure to contain 3 men upends its legacy and calls into question the entire philosophy behind extreme incarceration. If Morris and the Anglins could outsmart such a system, What does that say about the system itself? It raises uncomfortable questions about how institutions project power, and how truth can be distorted to serve political or bureaucratic ends. The psychology of the escape is as gripping as the logistics. These were not mindless brutes, but individuals capable of extraordinary patience, discipline, and cunning. The successful coordination of such a complex escape operation required not just bravery, but a level of trust between the men that transcended their criminal backgrounds. They were bound by a shared belief in freedom and a refusal to accept the sentence they had been handed. And while they were criminals, their escape transformed them into folk heroes for many, symbols of defiance against a dehumanizing system. The societal context surrounding the escape has also taken on new light in retrospect. The 1960s were a time of immense upheaval and distrust of authority. The escape occurred at the cusp of that cultural shift, and perhaps that's why it embedded itself so deeply in the public imagination. The idea that 3 prisoners could beat the system wasn't just a thrilling story, it was a metaphor for a growing skepticism about power, control, and institutional justice. Now, with the mystery solved, the allure of the story doesn't fade, it deepens. The idea that these men lived out their days in anonymity, building new lives somewhere far from the concrete confines of Alcatraz, invites a re-examination of how we view redemption, punishment, and legacy. Did they remain criminals forever on the run, or did they become something more, a cautionary tale, a triumph of human ingenuity, or perhaps both? One of the most profound aspects of the mystery's resolution is how it highlights the evolution of investigative technology. What once required hunches and dogged legwork can now be augmented with algorithms, imaging, and simulations. The very idea that heat signatures from over 60 years ago could be reconstructed to such a degree of accuracy speaks to the relentless march of innovation. But it also illustrates the enduring importance of curiosity and persistence. This case was only solved because someone refused to stop asking questions, refused to believe that the official version of events was the only version worth considering. In some ways, the final solving of the Alcatraz mystery is more unsettling than the uncertainty ever was. Certainty brings closure, but it also eliminates the space for wonder, speculation, and imagination. For years, the escapees were seen through a haze of half-truths and whispered stories. With the truth now uncovered, those ghosts take on flesh. They become real men who defied the odds and rewrote their fates in the most audacious way possible. The implications don't end with Alcatraz. This revelation could prompt new investigations into other so-called unsolved prison escapes, cold cases, and dismissed anomalies. If the story of Alcatraz could be rewritten after so many years, what other narratives have we gotten wrong? What truths are still hiding in plain sight, waiting for technology or determination to drag them into the light? There's a poetic irony to the fact that the very prison designed to break the human spirit may have, in its failures, immortalized it instead. The escape from Alcatraz was never just about 3 men and a raft. It was about daring to imagine freedom in the most hopeless of places. And now that the truth is known, the story carries an even heavier weight. These weren't mere fugitives, they were men who cracked the code of the uncrackable, who used intellect as their weapon, and who vanished not into legend, but into life. No amount of institutional control could account for the resolve that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers brought to their escape. They turned the tools of their confinement into instruments of their liberation. Every broken vent, every smuggled spoon, every salvaged raincoat became part of a symphony of defiance. Their success, now confirmed, is less about escape and more about transformation. They didn't just flee a prison, they dismantled its mythology piece by piece. As the truth settles in, it also reframes the concept of security itself. Alcatraz was the end of the line. There was no more secure facility in the country, and yet it was outwitted. That fact shakes the foundations of how prisons are conceived and how infallible we believe them to be. It challenges the belief that physical barriers alone are enough to contain the human desire for freedom. Equally astonishing is the realization that this story lived on in complete silence for so long. If the escapees did indeed flee to Brazil, as evidence now suggests, and lived undetected for years, it speaks to the extraordinary discipline required to maintain such secrecy. No slip-ups, no sightings, no arrests. They managed to erase themselves from the system while rebuilding their lives in the shadows. That kind of control takes more than luck. It takes constant vigilance and the ability to adapt to an entirely new world without leaving a trace. The success of their escape doesn't mean they found peace. Living as a fugitive, even far from the reach of U.S. law enforcement, comes with its own psychological toll. But it also suggests they had help, possibly from sympathetic parties who believed in their cause or simply admired their audacity. The layers of secrecy, planning, and resourcefulness required to disappear completely for decades hint at a support network, however small or informal. If such a network existed, it operated with the same precision and silence that marked every other part of the escape. And so, the Alcatraz mystery, now finally solved, transforms into a legacy. It's a story that continues to evolve, not just as a chapter in criminal history, but as a mirror reflecting our ideas of justice, punishment, resilience, and the complexity of truth. The end of the mystery doesn't mean the end of fascination. It simply gives it sharper contours. The fog has lifted, and what we see now is far more astonishing than any fiction we might have imagined. With the veil of uncertainty now lifted, the sheer magnitude of what unfolded during the Alcatraz escape takes on a new and richer dimension. Previously obscured by layers of myth and institutional denial, the full truth reveals not just an extraordinary event, but a daring maneuver that shook the very principles of maximum security incarceration. The notion that 3 prisoners could vanish from a fortress designed to extinguish even the idea of escape forces a re-evaluation of everything that defined Alcatraz and what it truly failed to do. One of the most intriguing revelations lies in the escapees' uncanny ability to disappear so completely. The operational execution of the escape itself was impressive, but the true brilliance came afterward. Escaping from Alcatraz was only the first step. Survival required far more subtlety. Evading detection, navigating foreign countries, learning new languages, acquiring identities, and integrating into unfamiliar cultures, all without drawing the attention of global law enforcement, points to an astonishing level of foresight and adaptability. They didn't just run, they prepared to live. It also reveals something deeper about human capability under pressure. The institutionalized view of these men framed them as dangerous, desperate, and impulsive. But the real story challenges those assumptions. They were methodical, inventive, and focused, driven not by chaos, but by a long-term strategy. They had an understanding of time that went beyond the rigid routines of prison life. They weren't thinking in days or months, but in years. The patient accumulation of resources, the silent collaboration, the measured psychological manipulation of guards, all of it speaks to a kind of genius, however uncomfortable that truth may be. Perhaps most chilling is how quietly they seem to have lived following the escape. For over 60 years, there were no legitimate leads strong enough to reopen the case. There were whispers, sightings, and anonymous letters, but never a single verified trace. This wasn't just a fluke of luck. It was deliberate, painstaking anonymity. They understood that success meant becoming invisible. No boasting, no contact with family, no return visits. It suggests a clarity of purpose that's hard to comprehend, choosing isolation over ego, obscurity over recognition, freedom over familiarity. They didn't seek the spotlight. They sought silence. This speaks volumes about their psychological resilience. Most escapees eventually trip themselves up. They contact relatives, commit another crime, or simply become complacent. But not these 3. To remain off the radar for decades, they would have needed to abandon every aspect of their past. They had to strip away their previous lives and assume entirely new ones. That requires more than strategic planning. It demands an emotional discipline most would find unbearable. What's more, the fact that they likely escaped to South America raises questions about the assistance they may have received. It's possible they acted alone after reaching land, but international travel in the early 1960s, especially without identification or official documents, was no easy feat. Someone may have been waiting, perhaps a sympathetic accomplice, a relative with resources, or even someone within the prison system itself. The potential involvement of an unknown benefactor adds yet another layer of complexity to the story. If such a person existed, they would have been operating with the same level of discretion and commitment, making them just as elusive as the escapees themselves. Another striking aspect is how the escape reveals flaws in the assumptions made by law enforcement and prison administration. In the aftermath, the consensus was shaped by pessimism. The currents were too strong, the waters too cold, the raft too primitive. It was comforting to believe the men had perished. Yet, as the data now shows, those assumptions were based on generalized testing, not on the precise conditions of that night. The science that confirmed their survival existed all along. It just hadn't been applied with the right lens. This raises questions about how confirmation bias shaped the investigation. Once the dominant belief was established that the escape was a suicide mission, it influenced the trajectory of the search. Resources were focused in the wrong places. Potential leads dismissed as implausible. The overwhelming desire to maintain the illusion of Alcatraz's invincibility may have skewed the interpretation of evidence. And so, the myth endured not because it was true, but because it was convenient. Now, the unfiltered truth challenges not only the credibility of past investigations, but the broader system of incarceration itself. If a facility like Alcatraz could be outwitted, what does that say about the rest of the prison infrastructure? This isn't merely a historical footnote, it's a contemporary concern. The assumption that physical walls and remote locations are enough to prevent escape must be reassessed. The lesson from Alcatraz is not just about brute security, but the unquantifiable strength of human will. On a cultural level, the resolution of the mystery taps into our collective obsession with true crime and the allure of the outlaw. The escape has captivated the imagination for so long because it offered an open-ended narrative. It allowed us to project hope, fear, admiration, or disdain onto three shadowy figures. We saw in them what we wanted to see: daring rebels, cunning criminals, tragic souls. Now that we know they lived, the story becomes less about speculation and more about confronting uncomfortable realities, about the justice system, about punishment, and about redemption. There's an undeniable element of justice inversion here. Society branded them as irredeemable. Yet their escape, in its elegance and success, has been viewed through a lens of reluctant admiration. This irony adds another dimension to the case. It's not that people condone their crimes, but that their ability to beat an unbeatable system resonates with something primal. There is something universally compelling about individuals who defy fate, especially when that fate was imposed by an institution. The revelation also sharpens our understanding of the institutional mindset that governed Alcatraz. Designed to be more than just a prison, Alcatraz was an architectural expression of dominance. It was built to isolate, to humiliate, to extinguish hope. But the escape pierced that design at its heart. It wasn't just about escaping a building, it was about escaping a philosophy. The walls of Alcatraz didn't just hold bodies, they aimed to crush spirits. That the escapees succeeded means they didn't just break out, they broke free. And there's another quiet yet powerful aspect to this story. What the escapees chose not to do. They didn't seek revenge, didn't commit further crimes, at least none that were detected. They disappeared into civilian life, which suggests their drive wasn't to hurt or exploit others. Their goal was something more existential: to reclaim agency over their lives, to exist on their own terms. It makes the story not just about escape, but about redefinition. What we also see now is a timeline that runs parallel to our own, one that the rest of the world never got to witness. While the world speculated, dramatized, and sensationalized, these three men were living, aging, adapting. They passed through decades we thought they'd never see. What must it have been like to watch the moon landing from a place you were never supposed to reach? To hear of the fall of the Berlin Wall, or the rise of the internet, knowing the world believed you were dead? The poignancy of that hidden life is almost overwhelming. There is tragedy woven into the triumph. Their freedom came at the cost of erasure. They couldn't celebrate birthdays with family, couldn't return home, couldn't ever fully let down their guard. They won their freedom, but in doing so they stepped into a kind of exile, a different kind of prison, one with no bars but no safety either. Yet even with all this known, one question remains tantalizingly unanswered: why? Not why they escaped, that much is clear, but why they never sought to reveal themselves, even once the danger had passed. Was it fear? Was it principle? Or did they simply find peace in anonymity? It's possible they lived with a constant awareness that any public slip could mean extradition and re-imprisonment. But it's also possible they chose to let the world continue believing what it wanted to believe. That may be the most powerful act of all, to choose silence over glory. With the case finally closed, the landscape of criminal folklore shifts. The Alcatraz escape no longer sits in the realm of unsolved mysteries, but in a new category: solved enigmas whose answers only deepen the intrigue. The definitive conclusion does not diminish its mystique, it heightens it. For in knowing what happened, we are forced to confront why it happened, how it happened, and what it truly means. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us. What are your thoughts on the Alcatraz mystery finally being solved? Shocking or not, we want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.